Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
2 certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only 2 best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day. I know you don't know
people
how I
have a
feel
lot
about
of
this holiday. It's kind of dumb.
I think it's kind of dumb too, frankly.
But it's also fine. It is what you make of it.
I mean, if you just want to use it to celebrate love, there's nothing wrong with that. In all of its forms.
I think that's the problem, is that there's just so many good relationships that never get celebrated. Which is why in Parks and Rec, Amy Poehler was a legend and established Galentine's Day, which was yesterday. So really happy Galentine's Day, because I feel more attached to that as a notion than Valentine's Day.
I agree.
I have a lot more female love in my life than male love, and that is just a fact.
Well, you know what? If they want to share some love with us, you should leave us a rating and review.
It's been a while.
That can be like you writing a love note, send us a Valentine.
Please send me and Kristen a Valentine.
Via a rating and review.
Via a rating. A rating is good. A review is even better. On whatever platform you listen. Of course, we love it on Apple Podcasts, but whatever is fine. Or you can just, if you've already done it and you want to just send us like a Valentine today, I would love to just get emailed from you today.
Contact at clarityonfire.com.
Sure, just email us. I mean, that sounds like I'm just like shilling for love, and I kind of am.
Well, you know what?
But I'll send something to you back in return.
Sure.
I'll send you a Valentine too.
I think it's okay to demonstrate to people that you can ask for what you want. You can ask for
what you
love
need.
And feedback, and
which is love. I need love. Give it to me now. I'm not codependent or anything. I'm really not most of the time. But yeah, please, that would be lovely. A really good way to just say thank you if you've been listening and you like it and it just hasn't occurred to you to do that yet. That's fine. Okay.
So now we're on to
someone else I love.
Yeah, your interview with a normal person.
Amanda, she's so cool. I mentioned in the kind of end of last week's episode, if you didn't catch this, that Amanda really, I think, broke the mold for what a normal person interview is in a good way, and that she was just willing to go there with things that some people, if not most people, would probably not want to talk about, this taboo. And she was just like, no, here's the deal with me and my life. And I really, really, really appreciated her honesty, particularly around like, you know, her leaving her marriage and how she left it and why she left it and the shame she felt around the way that she left it. And then forgiving herself for behaving in a way that like a lot of people would say was not cool.
Yeah.
And we had such a good conversation about what it means to forgive yourself. We talked about a lot more than that too. We talked about how when you're holding on to shame like that, it makes it hard for you to make any progress in life in general. Like she was really stuck in her career in large part because she was so hung up on something that she couldn't let go in her personal life. And so it's just a really good, meaty episode. You're going to like it.
I'm excited to listen to
It's like a nice like candlelit steak dinner on your Valentine's Day. I don't even like steak that much, but that's what this feels like. It feels hearty and rich.
I love it. Okay,
let's Amanda.
Yeah, let's hear more about Amanda. At 48, Amanda Michaelis is finally starting to figure out who she is. Amanda's shift in her life occurred after the end of an almost 20-year marriage. During that time, she dove deep and discovered who she was, what she valued, and how she was meant to live her life. Her career has led her into the healthcare industry, a large family-owned and operated regional business, and most recently, the nonprofit world. Amanda is currently participating in an open, transparent transition process with her board of directors to move out of her current organizational leadership role and into the world of self-employment as a coach and facilitator in her own business called, appropriately enough, Shift Your Perspective. In addition, she is deeply committed to developing leaders in her community. She's in her 6th year facilitating both the adult and junior community leadership programs in her town. Her goal these days is to like herself today more than yesterday. That's just the human goal. I think we should all adopt that one.
I think she's doing a really good job at it too. So you have a lot to learn from Amanda. I try to bring on people who I think you're going to learn from, and Amanda is someone who's like top tier. You can learn from her. All right, so we will be back at the end. Hello, Amanda.
Good evening. Hello.
I know, it is evening. I don't usually do podcasts when it's pitch black outside, but here we are.
Here we are.
That's nice. I feel like I'm having like an evening coffee or tea chat or something with you now.
That's kind of what I was thinking too. It was kind of like maybe just like curl up on the couch and put my feet under me and have a chat.
I feel like that's exactly what it's going to be like. So I was kind of shocked to discover when I was going back to our notes from when we were working together that I first started coaching with you almost 2 years ago. And it's just gone by so quickly, but so much has changed in your life in those 2 years. And so I'm really excited to have you kind of get into everything that's changed.
Absolutely.
But to give people some context, like, where do you feel like you were, physically, emotionally, of course, like 2-ish more years ago?
Yeah. Well, so 2-ish years ago, I was 2-ish years out of a divorce.
Yep.
And I was 5 years into a job at a nonprofit organization as the executive director. And I was desperate, I think, really, for a new job. And I had, I guess, to take a step back, when I took this job, I felt like what my board expected of me in that job was generally a 5 to 7 year time frame. And so I'd had in my head that I probably wasn't going to be there for longer than that. And as it happened, what they really expected of me, we got through in closer to 4 years. And so the things that our organization was needing next were things that I didn't have a skill set for. And nor did I really want to learn at this stage. I mean, I'm almost 50 years old, and I knew I could learn these things, but they weren't things that felt to me like I genuinely wanted to keep doing for the rest of my life. Mm-hmm. And so I had kind of started, casually looking for a job. I think it's also fair to say that at that point in time, even though I was 2 years out from a divorce, I was still pretty emotionally fragile. And that's a whole nother part, I suppose, of something we can talk about. Yeah. But on the job perspective, I had a series of interviews that with different places. One place was I had 5 different interviews and didn't get the job. Ugh. Another place that is real. This is even more ridiculous. That was even a local place. I don't kid you when I say I had 10 interviews.
Oh
10.
My God.
10 interviews and didn't get the job. And
that's so insulting.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't even know why I kept going. I mean, it was anyway. I could explain a lot to them about their HR practices, but that's okay. I was visiting with my mom and kind of about that. And one phone interview for someplace I had done at her house for some reason. And it wasn't like she was listening in the door, but afterwards we were just chatting and we were just talking about it. And I was expressing my frustration of, lots of interviews, never a job offer. And she said, if you want to, if you're interested in maybe some interview skills, help, or something like that, she said, your dad and I would be happy to, help if you are interested in that. Because it seemed like at the time that, you have all these interviews and you don't get a job. So maybe the problem is that you're not great at interviewing. Mm-hmm. That kind of makes logical sense. And so I kind of started thinking about that. And I guess I didn't necessarily really feel specifically like that was the problem, but I couldn't really pinpoint it. And don't ask me why, but I started just Google searching interview skills training, interview coaching. I don't know exactly how it came up, but career coaching somehow kind of came up, and which is how I stumbled across you guys. And so as I really learned more about the coaching side of things, it really helped me discover that, well, two things. I knew going into it that it was more than just interview skills that I was needing. But that really was the kind of really starting to be the formative time of, I wonder what I do with my life now kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so the online quiz, of course, and how I kind of found you and all of that really came out of that, like, sort of incessant searching for a job, never getting a job. Maybe I need interview skills. So
it's so funny that you ended up finding us because you were wanting interview skills, because anyone who listens to this podcast knows that's not what we do.
Totally.
And it's like very, it's very synchronous and sort of serendipitous that you ended up kind of probably where you needed to be, which was doing a much deeper inventory than just interview skills.
Well, and I do believe that is so much the truth, because had I gone to someplace to just get help on interview skills, for sure as heck I wouldn't be where I am today. But I also know that had I not worked on addressing some of the other stuff that we addressed, emotionally I would still be at the other place too. Yeah. So it was meant to be.
So I'm curious, when you say addressing the stuff that needed to be addressed for me emotionally, what do you feel like you needed to be emotionally addressed back then?
Well, a couple of things. So I was in an almost 20-year marriage that had over time deteriorated, and not in the kind of way that when we separated and told people we were getting a divorce, so many people were like, oh my God, I can't even believe that. And as happens in relationships, most of the time, only the people in the relationship really know what's going on in the relationship. And I don't mean to say that as in, this is not like abuse or any of that kind of thing, but we just had deteriorated over time. And unfortunately for me and my family, really, honestly, I was not faithful at the end of my marriage. Mm-hmm. And that in and of itself was something that really weighed heavily on me. And really right as I was going through the divorce, I am active in my church. I went straight to my pastor and, said, this is tough for me. And we had a lot of conversation around, you're forgiven. And, kind of those, like the religious, I guess, if you will, the faith-based side of that. Mm-hmm. But for whatever reason, it never felt like I had let that go in my own way. And so I will never forget, I was sitting in the park in my car talking to you in our first or second coaching session. And it was the moment I learned about acknowledgement and acknowledge and validate and how what that does to a person.
Yeah.
Because I was telling you the story and I remember you saying, okay, don't you think if you were listening to this story that somebody else was telling you, doesn't it make sense? It makes sense that you feel this way based on what was going on in X, Y, and Z. And it was just one of those times that I think that seriously allowed me to be like, okay, here's a total stranger I just told my whole story to, and I can let that go from myself. It was the 165-pound gorilla on my back that I chose to carry around every day.
Well, so I'm very grateful you're willing to talk about this, because I feel like a lot of people would not, but it's a very common issue. Whether or not people actually stray from, the bounds of their marriage, or whether they think about it.
Yep.
It's a thing. It's a very common thing.
Yep.
And I think what happened with you is that you did something, you then internalized it, and you made it about who you were as a person. And so you were carrying around a ton of shame. Uh-huh. And I think, unfortunately, the world wants to validate or wants to kind of, tell you you're right to feel ashamed.
Yeah.
And you kind of, because you feel bad, you want to punish yourself. And so it becomes like, I'm not a great person. Yeah. And so you're kind of constantly castigating yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think I can't remember exactly what I was thinking in that moment, but I know what I'm thinking now.
Yeah.
Which is, as long as you are eaten up with shame and guilt and castigating yourself, you can never do two things. One, you can never actually address why it happened in the first place. You know, you can't get to the root of what led you to do that, because people don't just do things randomly. Like, there was a series of events and feelings and long-standing issues that led you to that action. And two, you can't move on. Like, you can't move forward. So you froze yourself in time, sort of, in this perpetual guilt and shame and castigation. And so I also want to like zoom out and show people that has a profound effect on every area of your life. It's not like you can be in that level of emotional turmoil and shame and then have that have absolutely no impact on your career whatsoever. Like,
right.
It was
so true.
Yeah. So, and so that's, why I tell people that coaching, you can start on any branch of the tree, but at the end of the day, you've got to get to the root system. And this was really what was the main thing. Well, it was one of the big things.
Yes.
That was really kind of poisoning the root system of your tree. And so until we addressed that, there was no point in figuring out what you wanted to do with your career. All of your energy was going there.
Yeah. And on top of that, I have come to believe something different than this now, but I had lived the majority of my adult life as the strong person, as the one who did not allow myself to feel my feelings, and who didn't share feelings, mostly because I didn't even know what that was. And so it was sort of like, on top of that, I didn't even have the facilities, the skill to even talk about it until you and I started talking about it, because I didn't come up in a family. I have a great family, but my parents are of a generation, and I think just personality wise, they don't talk about feelings. And so, you grow up in that. And then I have always been the strong person in the family. And so all of that, I think, compiled together to be this sort of big, giant like thing. Well, I do. Like I say, it's like there's just the gorilla I chose to carry around on my back every day. And I got up and I put it on. And so, and for sure, to move forward in the career area, I was doing all the right things, but it wasn't actually registering inside, if that makes sense.
Right. Well,
because there was such a block there.
Right. Huge block. And not only that, but you just made a really good point about, and this is actually very related, I think, to why your marriage broke down, why you felt the urge to get out of your marriage preemptively, was because you did not have the emotional and sort of the emotional tools that you needed, and your communication abilities were not great. And I feel like that was a huge part of why your marriage was in shambles.
Well, absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And he was somebody who generally does not falls in that same role. So, if there was ever something that we had a disagreement about or an argument about, it always followed the same cycle. I felt like I was sharing my feelings, what I thought was sharing my feelings, which he got defensive. I would shut down and it would be over. And I can look back at that cycle and realize that, so really what happened is nothing ever got resolved. So when something came up ever in the future, we both saw it our own way, because there was never a common resolution that happened. And so, for sure, it was about that kind of, that lack of communication. I went for months I just Googled a list of feeling words. I mean, this is how lame I am. I Googled a list of feeling words, and it was the wallpaper on my phone for like months. And every time I picked up my phone, I made myself think about, okay, look at this list of words to help me understand what I'm just feeling at the very moment. Just to practice being more in touch with that, because by no fault of anybody's, I hadn't been for at least 20 years. And that's a hard place to be when you can't talk about it because you don't even have the vocabulary. You've not let yourself talk about it in general, which becomes kind of part of your personality at that point. And then you don't have the language or the facilities to actually have the conversation. So, it was a journey for sure.
So when you say I had to, like, first and foremost, I really had to forgive myself and let go of all that shame and that guilt that I was carrying around, what do you feel like most enabled you to do that?
Well, I mean, I'm serious about when I was literally sitting there in the park talking to you. I felt
just getting acknowledged and validated. Yeah.
But I literally felt something come off of me. And then I started thinking about the whole saying about people can do bad things, but that doesn't make them bad people. And I think if I remember right, that's kind of where our conversation started to go from there.
Sure. Yeah.
And about the fact that we all do things and we all make judgments about how, quote, bad those things might be in our world, whatever that might be. If you're a vegetarian and you eat a piece of meat, that might be your bad thing. Okay, fine. But what you do with it going forward from there is, I think, what really matters. And so I really do. I feel like that acknowledgement and the ability for somebody who has no stake in the game to say, your feelings are your feelings, and that's perfectly fine. And you can feel them and go for it. Let's do it. So I don't know. I think that was just really the formative thing. That doesn't mean that as soon as our call was over, it was all good and fine and everything was over. But I really feel like that allowed that to start to go away.
I wonder, because I'm just I always like to play devil's advocate for anyone listening who might be pushing back on something. I like to get in their head and think, what are they thinking right now? Mm-hmm. And one of the things I wonder is someone out there thinking, what's the difference between genuinely forgiving yourself for something and letting yourself off the hook?
Yeah.
Not taking responsibility for maybe what you did or didn't do. So I'm kind of curious how you see the difference between those two things.
So I've done a lot of thinking about this, and some of this came from further down my path in coach training. But I feel like the word forgiveness generally is something that we have used and abused in our human world. I feel like true forgiveness is actually something that is given by the universe or your God or whatever your faith falls into to an individual as a person. Okay. I feel like on the human level, what it really is going to reconciliation. And so I feel like we've sort of bastardized the word forgiveness in a way, and that what we really have to do is reconcile with ourselves, which is, in my mind, a whole different thing than the word, quote, forgiveness. And so reconcile means you have to do work.
Yes.
So when you're talking about letting yourself off the hook and using, quote, forgiveness to let yourself off the hook, I think if you just say, okay, I'm gonna forgive myself and we're just gonna move on. Yeah, you're right. That doesn't do it. But to reconcile, whether it's me and him reconciling to the point that we can have conversation, we can raise our kids, all that, or it's reconciling with myself. And what have I done in situations that have led me someplace that I don't want to go again? Or, reconciliation requires work. Yes. And I think that's different than just say, here's a blessing, you're forgiven. I don't think I think it's hard for us to use the word forgiveness from human to human, or even from human to myself. We're getting a little woo-woo, sorry.
No, I get it.
But I feel like reconciliation is really what we as humans can do with each other and ourselves, because that requires work.
Yeah, it's not necessarily going and sitting. I mean, hey, if this is your jam, that's fine. But going and sitting in the confessional and getting forgiven when you haven't actually atoned. You haven't done anything.
Right.
Or taken any personal responsibility or taken a personal inventory of how did I get here?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what you did.
Yeah.
And so because of that, forgiveness is something I think you earned from yourself.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Right.
Yeah. And the trigger was that acknowledgement and validation. The trigger to, okay, now I can start to do the work.
It's really powerful. And people, I don't think people realize it because they don't experience it that much. But just one person making you feel like you're not crazy for feeling how you feel and telling you, hey, that makes sense based on your experience and the circumstances you were in. It makes sense that you would have done that or behaved that way. And someone just not judging you for it, but making an effort to understand where you came from. And it just makes a huge difference because most people don't offer us that. Most people are offering us opinions and judgment. And,
Right. Absolutely. Well, and I can even speak to take it one step further. So my ex told my kids about all of that stuff. And they naturally have held a lot of resentment towards me about that.
Yeah.
And I realized after I went to my first coach training weekend and learned about how to acknowledge and validate my other people, I realized all along I was trying to convince my kids to not be mad at me.
Yeah.
And when I got home, I walked in the door and said to my daughter, it makes perfect sense that you're angry with me based on the knowledge you have, and that's okay. Not kidding you, the weight lifted off of her back. And our relationship is 20 times better just from doing that.
Yeah, because before you were trying to deny her emotional experience.
Exactly.
And people literally only get more angry and more resolute in their position when you deny the experience that they are having and you try to like silence it or distract from it or, you know, try to smother it or something.
Right.
You know, you gave it space to breathe. And ironically, that's when people can let it go.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, are things perfect? Of course not. I mean, she's 18. So,
right,
you know, it's not gonna be...
who has a perfect relationship with their mother at 18?
Exactly. However, you know, it is 10,000 times better than it was. And because I'm not harboring the mad. At this point, I've decided if she wants to be mad, she can be mad, and that's fine. I channel a lot of Glennon Doyle and the but, you know, we can be mad at each other and we can still love each other.
Yeah.
Or, you know, and I just feel like our society is so black and white, and we feel like, you know, you have to be a Republican or a Democrat, or you have to like this or that or whatever. And that's not the case. I'm always going to be her mother. I'm always going to love her, and she can be mad at me, and we can still have a great relationship. And all those things can live in harmony, and that's fine.
Yep. 100%.
And that's the work part. That's the reconciliation part versus the, you know, hey, Molly, can you forgive me? You know, it didn't do anything.
Yeah, so. People don't like the and instead of but because it requires a lot more effort.
It's the work.
You know, you're right. You know, it's like, it's either like you're with me or you're against me. And it's like, no, you can be with me and you can be against me at the same time. That feels a lot harder to maintain. But that's life. And it's actually more fair to everyone to kind of allow all of those kind of seemingly paradoxical things to coexist at the same time.
Because they do in nature, they do everywhere else. So,
okay. I want to tie this to your career because I think in forgiving yourself, in like really like raking the emotional shit and turning it into fertilizer, that is what you did.
Oh, man.
You know, I think you became a much better communicator. You became a lot clearer about, you know, your baggage and why you had kind of fallen into some of the pitfalls you'd fallen into. And you were able to let a lot of that go. And so you started seeing yourself more clearly. You started seeing, you know, your values more clearly. It became easier for you to articulate who you are and what you wanted. Yep. So then, well, you know, you kind of gave it away in that you ultimately decided to go to a coach training.
Right.
And so what do you think led you to get clear on, I just want to hear your take on getting clear on what you wanted out of your career.
Yeah. So I think there were two kind of formative moments in that. Okay. One was, as you and I were working together, I was, you know, reading, doing my homework, doing those kinds of things. And I think it'll be interesting to see if you remember this, but at one point when we were talking, I think I said to you something like, oh my God, I don't know all these things. People are talking about their values and what do you know and what do you do and what do you like? I don't even know what a freaking value is. Tell me, you know. And I remember you saying something like, "Oh dear, I feel like I think you're maybe overdosing on personal development stuff."
I don't remember that.
But that was what led us to do the work on personal values. Okay. And so the work on my personal values was a really, really formative thing. And me really being able to put in front of me, I'm a visual person, to do that work and put it in front of me of, these are my values. And because I'm who I am, they spell something, which is great. But getting really clear on my values, that was one really formative part of figuring out the next step in my job life. The other part of that was I recognized that when I was looking for this next job, I had this sort of list, you know, I wanted to have the freedom to be able to go see my kids. They both are going to colleges far away from me, so I wanted to be doing that. My parents are aging. They're in good health, but I know that I'm going to want to be able to be available for that. My significant other's older than I am. I want to be able to have the time. So I had these sort of non-negotiables, which sort of led me down remote work, certain kinds of paths, if you will, because of that. And I would go through this interview process or whatever, and there would, let's say there were 5 things on the list. Well, 3.5 of them were checked. And so I never really kind of felt like that was it, but I was feeling sort of desperate. So as we started talking, what I ended up realizing was rather than taking, here's my list and going from that to find the job, I like flipped the script and took, here's what the life I want. Mm-hmm. What do I do? What needs to get in line to have that life? And for whatever reason, the values and that were the things that were like, okay, rather than having a checklist to a job, how about this is the life I want? Now, what is out there that allows me to do that? And so I don't know if people listening, if that makes sense, but for whatever reason in my head, it felt like going on the jobs, looking for a job from the other direction, which felt much more natural.
Well, I think that to sum it up, it sounds like what you're saying is, and I think this is true, is that most people, the way that they look for a job is they're sitting there thinking, what can I sacrifice in my life in order to kind of, get this job? Or how, it's like, what can I kind of compromise on in order to get a job? And what you decided is, what kind of job is going to fit in with my life? But I'm not going to make life compromises. I'm not going to amputate parts of my life to fit into a job. The job's going to have to fit in with my life. And that was a huge perspective shift for you.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Which is kind of funny now that you say that, because that is the name of my business, is Shift Your Perspective. But for that reason specifically was because of that, really taking that step back and seeing, what does this look like for me? And how do I, now that I know my values, how do I get those met in all areas of my life? I don't ever, I've also learned that to expect that all of our personal values get met in our job is BS.
Yeah.
But that's sort of societally what we're raised to think. And so, it's perfectly fine for me to get a certain value, not in my job, as long as I'm getting it met someplace else. Mm-hmm. And so,
I think people would be interested in hearing, what are a couple of your top values that were just like really important for you to have in your career?
Yeah, so my values spell the business phrase DISC, D-I-S-C.
Okay.
So discovering, which to me is really about always learning new things. Mm-hmm. And I'm realizing that further I go, it also is about, when you think of it in a more work-based sense, it's about I love to do things that are more maybe project-based. So shorter term engagements, things like that, rather than I'm great to create the policy and the procedure, but I don't want to do the policy and procedure for the rest of my career, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So discovery. So I love to learn new things, to go places, see new things, that kind of thing. The I is intimacy. And for me, that is about getting to know people deeply. In my job, I am often required to do things like chamber after hours and those sort of networking things. And they zap my energy because it's just going from one person to the next. And I don't ever feel like I really get to know somebody and spend time with them. So that kind of real deep relationship building is really important to me. S is for spark, and that is about the newness of things. Once again, sort of related to the project-based things. And then C is comfort. And it's one actually I've been working on. And you and I talked, I think, back then a little bit about that. But for me, comfort is possibly something that will go away because I feel like it might have been at the time kind of a fear-based value because I really felt like I wanted to be surrounded in comfort, whether that was like physically or the comfort of a known income or some of those kinds of things. And I feel like now that has lifted a little bit and I'm more in a place that I'm okay with not knowing all of that stuff. So those are really my 4 that's how I live my life. And so when people ask if I'm willing to be a part of something, I press those questions against what's it going to get me as far as my values.
And when you combine knowing the core, a handful of really core values, and you combine that with some non-negotiables in terms of what your lifestyle needs to look like, and, remote and flexibility and, how much you want to make, it becomes so much easier to discern what options are actually good for you.
OMG, yes.
And so after that, it became pretty obvious that getting coach trained was a good step for you. As someone who really cares about leadership and is a really, a good leader and loves discovery. So I just, I bet you a lot of people listening to this are like, do Rachel and Kristen just turn everyone they coach into coaches? No, the vast majority of them do not. Maybe more of them end up on the podcast. So it seems like, but no. But I would love to hear, like, from your perspective, what did you think you were going to get out of coach training, and what did you intend to do with it when you started, which was like a little over a year ago, I guess you started.
Yeah, I finished in May. So that's
year.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, May
2019.
2019. Yeah. Oh, last year. Yeah, that's right. So as a little bit of a backstory to that, I have, for most of my adult life, throughout the years, taught at the collegiate level as an adjunct professor. And so various business classes, communications classes, things like that. And anybody who knows about adjuncting, a lot of times what that means is every semester is a new class that you have to prepare for. You don't really ever get to make your syllabus better because you don't ever teach that class again. So anyway, throughout my life on and off, I've done that. I always kind of felt like maybe my retirement job would be to be a teacher like that in that capacity, more adult teaching than youth teaching. But so there's that. And then in addition, for the past 6 years now, I have been one of the facilitators for the local community leadership program that we have here in our community, which is, I love. There's a curriculum that we use. I get a lot of interaction with a lot of those students, if you will, are early to mid-career folks. And so, there's 30 students in those classes every year, and it has become something that I've just really loved. And so I think that kind of really acknowledging those values and the importance of them, along with sort of this leadership training and me being more open to people acknowledging that I had some skills in those areas, that I guess it just felt like the next right thing. I guess I'm embarrassed to say this, but I didn't really necessarily think, I'm going to go do this and then I'm going to work for myself and be a coach.
Yeah, I don't know that you knew at the time, which is fine. I just think it felt like the next right thing to do based on what you knew you loved, which was you loved, engaging people and helping them, shift their perspective in terms of, I think culture and groups and leadership. Like you just really liked that side of things.
Yeah,
and so
for sure.
It's like, it doesn't really matter what I do with it because this is going to serve me no matter what step I take next.
Yes. Yeah. I really felt like that was kind of the overarching sort of feeling about it. And it was an investment in myself that I felt like I needed to make to take another step forward. And it became clear to me as I was in coach training, it became much more clear to me how it would serve me going forward. And, in coach training, there's a lot of talk about how you build your business and how do you talk to people about that and all those kinds of things. And I found, honestly, it was so weird. The leadership class that I was facilitating at the time ends in November. And my first weekend of coach training was in November. Like literally the class ended and I left class early and went to Denver for training. And when I came back from training, there were 3 people in that coach training class who approached me and said, I want to know more about coaching. And which is completely weird and random. But I also think it was very telling about that it was the right direction I was going. And so it just was one of those things. And it has become much more clear to me now how this, at least in this season, will look, in that it is really a lot about being able to continue to do that facilitation. There are a lot of, fortunately for me, there are a lot of students who go through that who then are ripe for more personal development. And so, they are natural clients if they want to be. Of course, they don't, there's no reason they have to come to me, but they can if they want. There's other coaches in our community. But in addition to that, then to be able to use the coach training skills that I have for not just individuals, but to take that to a deeper level for working with nonprofits, doing board retreats. We sort of developed a different type of strategic plan that's based around values. And so it's kind of like, it just worked the way it's needed to work, honestly, even though I didn't necessarily have this long-term goal.
Not at the beginning. And I tell a lot of new coaches that, but I think it goes beyond just coaching, that sometimes you don't really know what the path is going to look like until you're walking it.
Yes.
And that's okay. You don't need to know what step 50 is going to look like. You just kind of need to take step 1, and then you can trust that the path will unfold in front of you as you continue to walk. But that takes a degree of trust and faith that things are going to work out, and which I think you had, and you've developed even more, because I think that's kind of how it works. It snowballs. You get a little bit of proof that things are working out, and then you feel more confident, and then you get more proof because you're feeling confident.
Yeah.
You become a magnet for more good things, and then on and on it goes. So that leads me to asking you, when did you know that you were going to quit your job and actually do this? Because, at some point you did not know that you were going to transition out of a job and start your own business. And that's a scary thing to do as a single mom. With 2, obviously your kids are a little older, and, but they're in college, they still have needs.
And the most expensive time of their life.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So how did that come about?
Yeah. So I said I work for a nonprofit, and at least the executive committee of my board knew I was going to coach training, because it didn't feel right to me to not let them know that. But they also knew I wasn't exactly sure what that meant or was going to look like. As I went to the next training and kind of really felt like I was getting a better handle on what this could look like going forward. It was March of last year that I said, I'm going to transition out of this job, and I'm going to go do this, and this is what I'm going to do full time. And I am not necessarily in a hurry to get out, but that's the long-term plan. In that process, our organization needed to and was ready to start engaging in a strategic planning process for the organization. And so what ended up happening was, in the fall of 2019, we engaged a strategic planner, and we inserted, as in part of that strategic plan process, the work about defining what was wanted and needed in the next director. And so I think because first of all, I think because I was completely open and honest. And second, because I was willing, it wasn't like I was going to a job in another office on January 2nd, that I could work with the organization, and they were happy to work with me as far as how that happened. So it was it sounds weird to say, it was a really open transition. And so, which is, I live in a small community in the middle of the country. 50,000 people. So, that kind of thing is, I think, kind of weird to most people. Like, You're leaving? Does your board knows you're leaving? And
you're supposed to keep that quiet until the last minute, and then quietly sneak out the back door, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I can say I spent the majority of time with one of the kind of business coaches that we're assigned in coach training. I spent the majority of my time with her figuring out what it would look like. How many clients did I need in order to tell my board that I was going to leave? And what did that look? I had this whole plan figured out. And the day after that, I was thinking about it. I was like, that just doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel good. I don't want to be working here while keeping this secret. And so I just abandoned that plan, and I just said, here's the thing. And what we had to do, we, as a board and we all sat at a table and acknowledged the risk, and I said, there is risk that you guys will leave this meeting and tell me tomorrow that your job is over in 2 weeks. We're going to hire somebody new. And I have to accept that risk. And there is risk on their part that I could just screw around and collect my salary and not do the work.
Yeah.
And so we just had to acknowledge that out in the open and say, we all had to commit to each other. If I feel this way or you feel that way, we have to bring it to the table. Mm-hmm. And so fortunately it didn't happen like that. But I can say we did have a staff member that in the process of the strategic plan, that particular staff person's job was going to go away. And so it made sense that we let that person know as early as possible so that they knew at the end of the year that job was not going to be there. And so I felt, oh, of course, this is great. I've been doing this. This is working well. It's the best thing to do to let this person know that, but yet they can continue working until they find a job and, it'll all be hunky-dory. Well, I learned it doesn't work like that for everybody. That particular person was really resentful. She felt like it was a slap in the face and all those kinds of things. And in that case, we learned that, it does have to be something that's a two-way street, and that I did not do a good job in having that two-way street conversation with that person, partly because, there was a lot of things, but I do know that I thought, oh, this is great. We can teach everybody in the world how to have this really open transition.
Yeah.
Well, no, it doesn't work like that. There has to be that kind of acknowledgement on both sides of the risk, and then the willingness to be open about it during the process. So
it's funny because as you've been talking, I'm laughing because so much of this sounds like what getting divorced should, kind of sounds like. And it's funny how much, you learn about good communication and how much of that was relevant to like being really open and honest and just putting all your cards on the table and like mutually parting ways.
Yeah.
And, it's funny. I had a call just yesterday with a client who is leaving her job in May, and she's staying until May because she's going to save a lot of money, and then she's going to kind of go back to school and get retrained in something she's really passionate about. And the worst part about going to her job every day is the fact that she has to pretend that she's going to be there indefinitely. And people keep asking her, what is your year-long plan? And she has to bullshit because and so I was like, how about just putting all your cards on the table and telling them on Friday that you're going to leave in May? Like, is it worth the risk of them saying, okay, you're done? And she's like, I don't even think, she's like, it's highly unlikely that they're actually going to say that. And she's like, I guess I just never thought that was an option, that I could like just be that honest and stick around for another 4 months. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I feel like that is it's a better use of your time and a much less of a gamble, to be honest, than to spend the next 4 months or whatever feeling miserable when maybe you don't have to pretend, and maybe they would appreciate that. And maybe it would give them more time to find the right person and for maybe have you guys overlap or something like that. Yeah. And that took a huge weight off of her. So just
for sure.
A nice little like kind of almost like side point here for people is you can be radically honest about your intentions when you're leaving a job. And I think it can go much better than you think.
Well, yeah. And I think the real work has to come in the acknowledging the risk for both sides.
Yeah.
Right. And that, you lay your cards on the table and say, okay, I know that here's what I've worked out as the risks for both of us. Right. The risk for you is you keep me on and I do nothing. Do you trust me enough to continue to do my work? And they have to decide that, of course. On the other hand, she can get to say, here's what I really didn't want to feel this way and BS my way through the next 4 months. And that likely I'm going to do better work now because I don't have to BS my way through stuff.
Right. And
that totally lifted weight off of me. And especially in our case, because there were things that needed to be done that didn't make sense for me to do when we knew a new director was going to come, when I knew that a new director was going to be there. And I care enough about the organization, it's a community organization. I care enough about it that I want it to be successful after I'm gone. And so how dumb is it for me to have all these things put in place when another person's going to step in 6 months that I know that nobody else does. So so that has been a really interesting transition. Now, as we were talking about before, I can say that in my mind, things were done at the end of the year because that's when I was going to transition out. And then, things sort of changed and they asked me to stay part-time for a little bit longer. And I thought about it and I've agreed to it. but on very finite terms and honestly on my terms.
Yeah.
And so that has been what has made it be okay that I'm actually still there, and because I still care, but also because there are really specific things that I am getting done before my time there is finished. And that makes that part of it easier. So
now that you're almost done, because your part-time work with the nonprofit is going to be up, by the time people are listening to this in a few weeks, probably.
Yeah. Yep.
And then you're going to be full-time, self-employed, like living the ideal life that you envisioned for yourself a couple of years ago, like having your freedom and your flexibility and doing something that, really feeds into your values of discovery and intimacy and all of that. And so I think the big last thing, I could get into much more, but I have to rein myself in. So one of the big last things I want to talk about is what's happened in your life, or maybe there have been signs or synchronicities, or I don't know, however you want to answer this question, but I want to know, how have you become someone who's trusting that things are going to work out when, inevitably being a self-employed person is risky, and it does not always have stability and security. And you have to have a lot of trust. So what's happened, or what's enabled you to become more trusting?
So to add to that, my boyfriend is also self-employed, which at the beginning added a whole nother layer of fear, to all of that, like, seriously, what do you do about insurance? What do you do about, all these things?
Right.
A couple of things. My peer coach through coach training and I did, when I was working with you, one of the things that I started doing was spending quiet time in the mornings, every single morning when I got up. And it's my own type of meditation. I'm terrible at just sitting and trying to meditate. It's just not my thing. But I love to get up and get up slowly in the morning, have my coffee, sit, look at my phone, maybe read, just kind of start my day that way. And my peer coach and I worked through really specifically, I really wanted to do some work on how do I tap into my intuition more and trust it. And so we worked through some things about what is it that what kind of conditions do I need to set regularly so that my intuition feels strong to me. And so one of those things is that morning time. And so I did a few kind of experiments around that. But during that time is really when I started to really feel more comfortable about my gut feelings about things and the trusting in general, kind of, as I say, kind of that trust in the universe. So I think that working on, and I feel like that's different for everybody.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Whether it's, meditation, whether it's quiet time, whether it's whatever that is, I get how hard that is. I know why it didn't happen for 20 years because I was raising kids. You're sleeping seriously, you're sleeping every minute you can, and you get up as soon as you hear the kid get up. So there's not any sort of time. And so anyway,
constant thing, like list of things to do, and never enough time to do it. Yeah.
Yes. And so working into that place of really feeling and trusting in my intuition. And there were a couple things that kind of, not that quote happened. I don't mean that they were like these big giant signs or anything, but there were just some things that confirmed for me that creating that space to be open to my intuition was working. So that creating that was one thing. I think the other thing was I'm a big reader. And in that same time, Tosha Silver's book, It's Not Your Money, came out.
Yeah.
So it's not my
we
money.
did a bonus book club about it back in February, maybe it was March,
right after it came out. Yeah, I think so.
It was like 2019. I'll link to it in the episode notes.
Yeah. And the phrase that continues to be something that I utter a lot is that I am but a conduit. Yeah. And that for me, money comes and goes. And my only job here is to not hoard it, but to be open to it coming and then putting it back out. And whatever that looks like in the world for different people, because I think that feels different for everybody. But for me, that really, and also because my boyfriend is self-employed, him being able to say, all of these years, I've had food on the table and clothes on my back. and to just see that there are people who make that work along with that sort of just the visual part of that conduit. I think those two things sort of happening really just allowed me to be really open, I guess, to whatever it is. And honestly allowed me to get to a point in my life right now. I have more money in the bank than I've ever had in my life.
Which is wild.
Yeah, but in preparation for going into this self-employed mode.
Yeah.
And whether or not I ever have to touch it or not is to be seen. But for me, that was all part of that process, that building and being able to do that and being open to working really hard. I worked 2 full-time jobs basically for a year, going to coach school, doing the homework, having clients.
That's a lot.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
And so I was lucky I got to save that because I was still working my other job, but I had to do it all before 8 or after 5 or on the weekends. So I think those were the 2 things for me in the self-employed world that really helped, was getting myself to a place where I was just okay and open with it. And that for me came with that sort of meditative stuff and Tosha Silver.
Yeah.
I'll
talk about it in the outro with Kristen for sure. Give them some more episodes on that front if they haven't gotten there yet, even though we talk about it all the time. But really, to sum up what you said, you worked on your ability to be receptive to intuition. And for everyone, that's kind of different, what works for you. But like the ultimate goal is to get into the receptive mode so that you can get guidance and nudges and signs, and so that you can be led to the right solution. You don't feel like you have to think it up in your head.
Yeah.
And because of that, a lot of opportunities and things can come to you that you were never expecting and that you literally could not have thought up because it didn't even occur to you that this could be a possibility.
Right. And just releasing that as somebody who, I think a lot of moms have this, but even not, the need to control it all. That you're saying about the next bus will come around,
Yeah.
And that, like, when I think the other part now that I think about that is when I got to that point with that about here's what I'm going to do, how many clients I'm going to have before I quit my job, X, Y, and Z. When I acknowledged to myself that honestly didn't feel right and I just let that go, I think that was also part of that formative part of if I'm just going to let that go, I have to have faith that what comes.
Yeah.
And I think just to conclude that, honestly, it has been life-changing for me to acknowledge that this is just a season in my life and it may not last until I am in the grave, and it may,
Yep.
And if all else fails, guess what? I'll go get a job,
Right.
I mean, so to acknowledge that this doesn't have to be the forever plan, I think that lifts a lot of weight for people too, that I'm going to change jobs. I think most of the time we think, okay, the next job is going to be the one I'll have forever. Okay, if that's what you want, but it doesn't have to be. So I think that was also part of that lifting.
Yeah. Yeah. Being supremely unattached to the outcome. I think about that a lot. I'm like, is it likely that this podcast exists in 10 years? I don't know. Seems like a long time to do a podcast.
I think you might be tired.
I don't know. Who knows? And who knows? Some other kind of platform or media might exist by then. It's impossible to tell. And honestly, I don't really care. I'll cross that bridge when it comes, and I'll trust that just like, the last 10 years have evolved. I didn't think 10 years ago I'd be sitting here talking to you. And so it doesn't, I trust. And so to kind of bring this full circle to the very beginning.
Yes.
I am so glad that the universe slammed the door in your face 10 times.
Yeah.
Because I think when that kind of stuff happens, like ludicrous rejection in your story, when you can look back in hindsight, it's so nice to be able to see that as like a loving rejection, as a redirection, right? Yeah. As a like, no, trust me, you don't want this. Like, there are better things in store for you. And we can't always know in the moment that that's what's happening, but it's nice to take stock and to look back and to be able to say for sure that, oh my God, thank God I didn't get that job. And like, it's kind of outrageous how much the universe is willing to support us in kind of making sure we don't go down the right path or the wrong path sometimes.
Well, I still think it's still that conduit thing, right? I had to have those experiences and I was the conduit for that in order to get to the next thing. And it didn't feel like that at the time. You're right. I mean, it was just rejection or almost stringing along maybe. But yeah, that's it's how I found you. It's how I figured out that what my own values are. It's my whole my business life is centered a lot around how do organizations find their values and to answer the tough questions in business. And so, yeah, it's been a great path.
I really wanted, and now I can't because it's been an hour, but I think this is actually a good setup for the future. I wanted to get into leadership and like organizational stuff like culture, and because you have so much to say as someone who has been an executive director of a nonprofit and who is a, leadership and organizational coach about all of that stuff. And but let's let you quit your job. Let's let you get your hands dirty for a while. And then when enough time has passed by, I can have you back as an expert to talk about all of those things, which I will delight in. Yeah.
Expert. That's like, I don't know about expert.
I think you already are, but that's fine. You can work up to it for a while. I can't have you back like 2 months from now. People would roll their eyes at me not being able to find another guest.
I would roll my eyes at like, really, Rachel? I know you know more people.
Yeah, but eventually I would love for you to talk about that. So
perfect. I'd love to do that.
Another thing to look forward to. Thank you. This has been, not to be biased to every other person who's ever come on this podcast, because I love all of you, but this has been a really, really great, kind of top tier conversation from my perspective. Mostly because of how willing you are to just literally talk about anything and everything that you've been through. And I think that level of honesty is not, and like to each their own, like some people don't want to be that forthcoming and that's fine. But the fact that you were able to be is, I think, really helpful to people who feel like they can't voice certain things aloud. Yeah. And I think that when we're able to actually give voice to things that maybe were our deepest shame, it really sets other people free. And that's a huge gift that you're giving people. So I really appreciate that.
Well, I am happy to do it. It is just, advice I got 4 years ago from somebody was own your story. And I can't change that. I can wish I didn't do it that way, but I can't change it. And so only thing I can do is take it and move forward. So,
yes.
And other people can choose to do that too, obviously. So,
yeah, I'm hoping that in doing that, you then kind of give people the acknowledgement and validation that, I was able to give to you that made a big difference. Yeah. Like you just kind of pay it forward. And that's part of reconciliation too.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So this has been awesome. I am so grateful, and I will hold you to an expert conversation at some point in the future. Okay.
Okay. Deal. We'll shake on it.
Okay. I will talk to you soon.
Yes. Bye.
All right, bye.
Amanda mentioned a book that was incredibly helpful for her when she was considering making a really big career change.
Yeah. And she is in the process of that transition. And she said that this really, really helped her start to feel secure financially so that she could make, the transition to full full
self-employment.
Self-employment. Yeah.
Well, I know that the money question is what holds a lot of people up from making career changes. Mm-hmm. So the book that she referenced is actually one that we've done a book club episode on. So we wanted to highlight that today in case you're also wanting a little bit of support in that arena. Mm-hmm. It's a book by Tosha Silver called It's Not Your Money. And we did a book club episode about that back in...
I told Kristen this like 3 minutes ago, and
March?
She has forgotten. Yes.
Oh, see, it was in there somewhere.
Okay.
March 2019.
Yes. So go listen to it. If you've heard us talk about outrageous openness so many times, which we did back in November of 2018. I did link to that one too. But It's Not Your Money is a book solely about how to kind of let go and let the universe take care of you in a financial sense and things that you can do. It's more action oriented. There's like a whole process you can kind of work through when it comes to opening yourself up and becoming more receptive to abundance in all forms, but definitely like cash, money.
That's the road we live in. So
yeah. So it's a really fun book. And I encourage you, if you haven't listened to that, to scroll back to March 2019 and check that out. Okay.
We'll be back on Tuesday. I don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I don't know.
We're debating a couple of things.
Yeah, so it'll be a surprise. And it may or may not be one of the changes that we alluded to making earlier this week. So we'll see.
Now you got to tune in and see.
Really titillating stuff. Okay. Bye.